All right, good morning. Back to the Merovingians. Now, I'm not going to say it, but yes, they are quite fair-haired and, well, oftentimes blue-eyed. I do have a page here I found. There are some that are brunette, but more often not, they are fair-haired. Where's this king? I have a king here. He wasn't one of the major kings. This one, that one there. Oh, there's a picture of him down there. Okay, great. I think that was, I don't want to say it's Clovis, but it could be, or Childebert. But yeah, so there they are. They came in through where with this fair hair, and they it's not typical of the French you see today, is it? You go to France now, very rarely do you find the fair hairs unless they're from England or the north. So I believe in the times after that there was a lot that mixed in from Spain and from Italy. So it could be the Germanic influence, of course. But yeah, it's 300 years thereabouts of, I guess we'll call them fair-haired. And unfortunately, we are not. Oh, here's this one. Here's Théry. Now, Théry we don't get often. He is a redhead. Théry the redhead. And well, yeah, he sure does look different, doesn't he? They always have strong, prominent noses, and I guess it all boils down to of what? Were their war tactics or more Germanic? Possibly. But yeah, the fair hair. And you're also starting to see, gosh, this is the worst lookup I found in a while. Okay, here's one. Here's King Childeric. Now that's a very good one of him. If I click on it, it probably won't work. Oh, there. Hi, Daddy. I know. He looks like my great-gran. There he is. Now, he does have those blue eyes. He has that wavy curly hair. And of course they had a different diet. Far different than today. And yeah, I don't know. I almost get the impression that because they had different ways of bathing, etc., that their hair just looks better. Look at that. It looks all fluffy in a way and yet soft at the same time. So, what happened to mine? Mine used to be much curlier, and in recent years, and I'm not blaming it on being vegan, but in recent years, it's lost a lot of its softness, and I believe that's just from age, though, being female. But it is interesting. So you have to remember, there's 300 years. Think of a group that looks like this in France. It's kind of pivotal in a way when you think about it, because you're going, well, maybe we're coming in from Norway and Germany, and all right, so I'm going to go back to my reading. Should I leave it on him? I'm not really doing Childeric today. I'm doing somebody else. Let's see, and I think it's Dagobert. We can look him up. I guess they made a movie, The Merovingian Kings. I know this is not direct reading, and this is a slight interruption to do these, but sometimes they offer some credibility. Now we're on Dagobert. I can't always do the chronological. And this happened. Okay, here we are, King Dagobert. Dagobert the First. Another prominent nose. My nose is gone. My grandmother used to always say, "You'll grow into it." About all of our noses, that we're just going to grow into them. Anyway, so here's Dagobert. But yeah, I do have a big schnauzer. Merovingian Frankish king. Now, when I'm saying Franks, the Merovingians were the Merovingian group of the Franks. Yes, they were classed as Franks, but there were other Franks as well. So it's possibly where you would find the darker haired ones is in the other side of those Franks. And you're seeing a lot of this all of a sudden, and they're more like the Carpathian look, they're bringing in blues and a lot more color. And there's Dagobert. Now he's coming in and saying he's King of Austria. And I have Dagobert the First. So he could very well be King of Austria. Now, very dark haired all of a sudden. So he's throwing us all off. Or the image is wrong. Because here's another image of Dagobert. I mean, this was, 500, 600 AD. Something tells me they've got some of the images off. Here's another one of Dagobert. Definitely a fair-haired. Near insane look. Oh, but I'm related to Dagobert. Yay. Okay. And here, complete difference, isn't it? This one. So I don't know, maybe he dyed his hair. He could have. They, apparently with all of their war outfits, I was reading earlier in the book that Trontrion, when they went into war, they had a hairpiece, a long horsetail that was red. Now I'm not certain if that was dyed red or it was simply the horses that are more red hair look more natural. So it's hard to imagine they went and dyed, used beets or something to dye all of those horsetails, for battle. I'm beginning to think it was definitely the color of the horse itself, rather than each horsey tail being dipped in a vat of beets, And we don't know everything, of course, but I did find that a soul of gold definitely is a coin of gold from, and that's the pronunciation for in French. Okay, so when I've been reading all this soul of gold, it just is gold coins in French, and they called them soul, S-O-L. He has another Dagobert the First, and he's also a fair. So I'm not sure what's going on there with the darker version of him, but today we're going to discuss Dagobert. I wish I had more time to do these in between, but the book is so lengthy. I have to get to it. All right, so here we are. We're going to go on with Dagobert the First. Is that a good screen to leave it on? I should do a better photo for it. Image. Any of those are fine. I don't know. There is at Battle. There's some coins. Yeah, I know. So many people are actually doing like movies on this. It's like, well, no, I'm reading an old book. I'm not doing a movie. And you all can just remove that entertainment want. This is just an audio, just it's an audio narrative. The fact that we always have to be seeing some visual in our eye, it's probably very bad for us. It's probably bad for our brains. We never get to conjure up inside our head any longer, Hear the words and then conjure up the imagines. We don't get that. Instead, it's like, oh, there it is. I don't have to imagine anymore. Oh, I have Alzheimer. So maybe that would be one of the reasons. One of the reasons that people are, just becoming more and more daft as they get older. Okay, anyway, there is the chair. Oh gosh, I did that once. I sat in a chair at a friend's apartment, and it was just some crummy cheap chair, and I broke the seat. I fell through on it, and they made such a joke at me that they almost never talked to me again. But that's interesting because there's the chair. It was similar, just like this, but with a cloth covering. Flimsy. All right, so off we go. So we can leave it at here at this darkened one because he does look quite intrigued, doesn't he? He looks mysterious. And yeah, it's kind of a prettier page of the whole mess. All right, Dagobert the First. And yeah, the horses, the color of the horses, I'm going with just brown horses. More so. The news, this is 628 AD. The news of Clotair's death had no sooner reached the court of Austrasia than Dagobert exerted all the arts of a refined policy to get himself acknowledged sole king of France. Yes, sorry, I had to check if I was online. So King of France. Oh my gosh, extraordinary. To the exclusion of his brother Heribert. He immediately dispatched into Burgundy and Neustria such of his ministers as he knew to be most capable of insinuating themselves into the good graces of the inhabitants of those kingdoms, and of procuring their votes in his favour. This ambitious monarch did not trust entirely to intrigue. He raised a powerful army, and placing himself at its head, advanced as far as Rheims. He there found all the Burgundian nobles and prelates who had come for the purpose of taking the oath of fidelity to him, and their example was soon followed by the Neustrians. Brunolf, brother to Aribout's mother, in vain attempted to oppose a resolution so hostile to the interest of his nephew. He was constrained to yield to necessity, and came with Heribert himself to do homage to the new sovereign. This was an open violation of the laws of the realm, which had ever admitted all the children of the French monarchs to a share of the kingdom. It's a heavy book, it's moving my keys, sorry. Share of the kingdom. Oh my goodness. But unfortunately, the most just cause is not always the most successful. The good qualities, however, of young Heribert at length shone forth so conspicuously that the nobles began to pity his hard fate. The wisest members of the council, fearing that this compassion might finally prove fatal to Dagobert, advised that monarch to form certain provinces. He has to get certain provinces into the kingdom and cede it to Aribert. He accordingly gave his brother, the Toulousan, Quercy, Agenois, Périgueux, Saintonge, and all that country which lies between. All right, Merovingians out there. Garonne and Pyrenees. But they obliged him to renounce all pretensions to the rest of the French monarchy. Aribert, having assumed the title of King of Aquitaine, set out immediately for his new dominions, of which Thoulouse was the capital. He lived there with splendour, subdued the Gascons who had revolted, and supported with glory the honour of royalty. The commencement of Dagobert's reign was distinguished by the most wise and equitable measures. The kingdom of Burgundy was desolated through the oppression of the nobles, who, profiting by the timid indulgence of Clotaire, had exercised every species of tyranny over their unfortunate vassals. The new monarch repaired thither in all the pomp of majesty and visited Langres, Dijon, Saint-Jean-de-Luz, Chalon-sur-Saône, Autun, and Auxerre. Listening to the complaints of the widow and orphan, and of everyone whose poverty or insignificance had rendered them most liable to oppression, he administered strict justice to all, and every crime was punished with an inflexible severity, without any distinction of rank or station. He was loaded with the benedictions of the poor. 1,000 praises were bestowed on the ministers who had advised him. The ministers who had advised him to pursue such prudent measures, and to see a young monarch so occupied in discharging the duties of his office as scarcely to allow himself time to eat his meals, afforded a theme for universal admiration. He was very busy, but amidst these acts of justice, amidst, we don't use that a lot either, amidst, right, in the grouping of a whole bunch of things, these acts of justice, he committed one of a very different description. Brunulf, Aribert's uncle, to avoid giving offence, had followed Dagobert into Burgundy, where that prince caused him to be arrested, and though he had nothing to accuse him of, he barely ordered him to be put to death. He just headed straight to it. He said, I'm ordering you to be put to death, just like that. And 3 noblemen of his court were base enough to execute his orders. Whoops. Gosh. Mr. Heavy Book. Stop that. It keeps moving the keys. Oh. It's trying to save a page. I don't know how it even gets to it. It's using the keys on its own. Oh, does that mean it's got witchcraft in association? Well, probably. probably the first of the Origin group are upset. They're like, you're too much Merovingian. Come on, get back to the pagans. Enough of this. Enough of this Christianity. Yeah, big controller. If you can, I'll put up one of those of all the churches. Oh my gosh, they went insane building churches as their controller group. And yeah, it definitely did settle the people, didn't it? Okay, so the king then returned to Paris. Here we're having I know I shan't say anything against any church, but yeah, they did take over politically more so. Okay, so here we are. So they executed his orders. The king then returned to Paris and soon after repudiated Gertrude under pretense of sterility and married Nuntilda, one of her maids of honor. Says, well, you're not making children, I'll marry the maid of honor. But even this second connection was insufficient to fix his volatile disposition. No longer restrained by the prudent counsels of Bishop Arnoul, who, wearied by a continual repetition of ineffectual remonstrances, had at length obtained permission to retire from court, the voluptuous Dagobert, hurried away by the impetuosity of youth, gave a loose to his passions, and rioted in excess of debauchery. Impelled by vanity, rather than actuated by any desire of administering justice to the inhabitants, he resolved on a journey to Austrasia. Gosh damn. Where he displayed all the pomp and magnificence of which he was so fond, appearing everywhere in his royal vestments. Attended by the chief nobles of Neustria and Burgundy, a young Austrasian, whose name was Ragnitrude, once more inspired him with love. And by her, by her he had a son, afterwards so celebrated under the appellation of Saint Sigebert. She, however, was soon succeeded by another favourite, and this amorous monarch had 3 wives at one time, all of whom were honoured with the title of queen. His mistresses were innumerable, and we are told that his excesses with regard to women were carried to such a height that historians were ashamed to particularize them. The treasures of this effeminate monarch proving insufficient to satisfy the avidity of his women, he was soon compelled to distress. He was compelled to distress his subjects by the exaction of new and onerous imposts, more tax. The magnificence displayed at the court of Dagobert exceeded everything which had hitherto been seen in the kingdom of France. The king had a throne of solid gold and that precious metal, with diamonds and other valuable stones. Appears to have been very common among the nobles and courtiers at this period. Wow, his throne. Okay, the French were indebted for these articles of luxury, partly to their commerce with the Eastern Empire, and partly to their Italian conquests. But still the people groaned under the iron hand of oppression, and the ministers became responsible for the exactions of the prince. The virtuous Pepin was the first object of public calumny and of public hatred. Hostile to the vices of his sovereign, he rather aspired to the character of a censor than that to a base and servile flatterer. Every scheme which malice could invent was adopted for his ruin. But his prudence, his piety, and his virtue frustrated all the pernicious designs of his unprincipled enemies. 630 A.D. Aribert, of a disposition very different from that of his brother, was solely intent on promoting the happiness of his subjects, by whom he was adored. The wisdom and mildness of his government made the French repent the injustice of their conduct towards them. But he was unfortunately snatched from the world by a premature death, and left his subjects to deplore his loss. With a deep and grateful sorrow, a deep and grateful sorrow. So he was quite loved. His infant son, Chilperic, did not long survive him, and at his death Dagobert succeeded to his treasures, which were considerable, and to his dominions, which were a most flourishing condition. The tranquillity which France had enjoyed for a length of time, which in those days of commotion and revolt was considered as extraordinary, was now suddenly interrupted by a merchant, formerly a subject of the Gaelic monarchs, but lately promoted to the sovereignty of a powerful nation. This man, whose name was Samo, had left home in company with several of his countrymen for the purpose of, traffic, I guess so, the purpose of traffic with the Sclavians, a people that occupied not only that country, which is now called Sclavonia, but also Bosnia, Dalmatia, Croatia, and part of Bohemia. So now we're getting on the other side of Italy there, thinking of the Slavic zone. Okay. Slovenia, etc. All right. They, here they are. They. It's really hard to crease this open because I don't want to hurt it. They had advanced as far as the Danube and had been subdued by the Abari, but the ill treatment they experienced from their conquerors at length induced them to revolt. In order to shake off a yoke which oppression had rendered intolerable, at this period the French merchants arrived in their country, where the flames of war were about to rage with incredible fury. Samo generously offered them his services, and in the course of the contest performed so many prodigies of valor that they unanimously chose him for their king. Endued with a capacious and heroic mind, his efforts were dictated by prudence and enforced with courage. Their success was accordingly complete, and he had the satisfaction of liberating his new subjects from tyranny and oppression. But forgetting he was a Christian, he lived among them in all the licentiousness of, paganism, and profiting by the custom of polygamy, which he found established in his dominions. He married 12 wives, who gave birth to 20 sons and 15 daughters. So 22 sons and 15 daughters from 12 wives. Such was the man who now disturbed the tranquillity of his native country. The subject of the quarrel was an insult offered to certain French merchants, who had, according to custom, gone to traffic with the Sclavians. Those barbarians, in violation of the rights of nations, had seized their merchandise and massacred such as attempted to defend their property. Dagobert demanded reparation for the injury, but in vain. Samo even refused an audience to his ambassadors, one of whom, however, named Sicarius, found means to gain admission to his presence under the disguise of that he ordered him to be dismissed in an ignominious manner. War was accordingly declared, and 3 armies were sent from France to attack the Sclavonian monarch. So the monarch is in 3 different quarters, who was therefore compelled to make a similar division of his troops. The first of these divisions was defeated by the Germans under the conduct of Duke Clodibert. The Lombards, who, though formerly tributary to, were now in alliance with France. They beat the second and obtained a considerable booty. But the third, in which Samo probably fought in person, attacked the Austrasians with such vigour that they retired in disorder. This check superinduced the detection of the Urbians. The Urbians. Are you an urban? Yeah, an Urbian or Sorabian, a people on the borders of Thuringia, who, with Dervan, their duke, sent over to Samo the Sclavonians. Went over to Samo. Right. The Sclavonians, acquiring fresh courage from this acquisition, extended their incursions as far as French Germany, which they desolated during several years. I don't know why I'm giggly today. Oh my gosh. Okay. Dagobert indeed had raised a powerful army in order to oppose them, and had actually advanced as far as Mayence, where he was preparing to pass the Rhine, when some envoys from the Duke of Saxony came to make him a proposal. And that must have been rejected with indignation and disdain. He had not preferred the tranquil pleasures of repose. He didn't want to rest to the dangers attending the acquisition of glory. No, had he not preferred the tranquil pleasures of repose to the dangers attending the acquisition of glory? this is leading up to a bad thing. He should have just stayed at home and relaxed. Anyway, they undertook to defend with their own troops all the frontiers of the French possessions in Germany, on condition that a tribute of 500 oxen, which the Saxons were obliged to furnish for the king's household, should be remitted. He accepted this offer, granted the exception required, and leaving the defence of Thuringia to them, dismissed an army at the head of which he might have given laws to all the nations in the vicinity of Austrasia. 633 AD. The Saxons, however, soon discovered their inability to repress the incursions of the Sclavonians, and accordingly, giving up the attempt, Thuringia was again exposed to the rage and avidity of that barbarous people. These disappointments filled the monarch with grief, though they provoked inadequate to rouse him from his peaceful lethargy. At length he determined to give the crown to Austrasia, to young Sigebert, who had, here we are, not yet attained his 4th year. He's quite young. He assigned him a revenue sufficient for the support of his regal dignity, and appointed 2 persons to attend him, who were celebrated for their wisdom, prudence, and virtue. These were Cunibert, Bishop of Cologne, and Adalgise, Duke of the Palace of Austrasia. This step was attended with all those beneficial consequences which he expected to derive from it. The Austrasians, having now a king of their own, imagined they had recovered their ancient liberty, and prosecuted the war with vigour and effect. The Sclavonians, repulsed on all sides, refrained from their depredations, and kept within the bounds of their own dominions. That 4-year-old was the one who did it. But the satisfaction experienced by the Austrasians on this event was somewhat allayed by another measure of Dagobert's the following year. By the advice of Saint Amand, whom he had recalled from banishment, he had again taken Nuntilda to his bed, and had a son by her, named Clovis. Fearing that this young prince might meet with the same injustice as Heribert, he took every precaution that prudence could inspire, to ensure him a crown after his death. With this view, he assembled the nobles of the 3 kingdoms at Paris, and declared to them his intention of appointing Clovis to succeed him in the kingdoms of Burgundy and Neustrasia, at the same time ensuring to Sigebert all the possessions he now enjoyed, and promising to leave him whatever had formerly appertained to the kingdom of Austrasia, vis-à-vis a part of Champagne, the Ardennes, Vosges, and all the places in short, which his predecessors had possessed in Aquitaine, Provence, and all other parts of the empire, with the single exception of the duchy of Dentelanus, which he reunited. Okay, I'm on now 114 page. I think this is going to be the only one of this from the set. This is going to be the only book I'm going to read from the book, and the others, if I do go into them, I'll read them online, which might be better for people to look at. Because you like to see things, I guess. I don't know, maybe this is good for the blind. You listen to me. Maybe the blind have excellent, but maybe they don't get Alzheimer's. They don't have that stop, they can imagine. So anyway, off to Neustria, from whence it had been detached by Theodobert II. The Austrasian nobles could with difficulty be prevailed on to consent to this division of the kingdom, but all the rest of the assembly declared strongly in favour of it. They were compelled to withdraw their resistance and place their hands to Sigebert's renunciation of Burgundy and Neustria. All right, 636. No sooner was this business terminated than Dagobert found himself obliged to fend a numerous army against the Gascons, who had revolted. That turbulent people were soon reduced to subjection, and Aiguillon, their duke, with all their principal nobles, were forced to repair to Saint-Denis, where they besought the king's pardon for their offence, and took an oath of allegiance and fidelity. A similar insurrection took place in Brittany, where Duke Judichar, in violation of existing treaties, assumed the title of king and committed depredations along the frontiers of France. But the reduction of the Gascons induced him speedily to renounce his pretensions to royalty, and in imitation of Aiguillon, he hastened to Clichy, where the court then was, asked pardon for his transgressions, and swore eternal obedience to Dagobert. Eternal, yes, please, don't kill me. So there we are, 638 AD. So little Brittany over there on the edge was trying to have a kingdom on its own. I lived there too. All right, so that monarch, however, did not live long to enjoy the blessings of peace which he had secured to his subjects. Being seized with a dysentery at Epinay, a royal seat on the Seine, he was conveyed to Saint Denis, where he died in the 35th year of his age. It could be 36th year. And was buried in the church belonging to that abbey, which he had richly endowed. He had 4 wives, Gertrude, whom he repudiated, and Nuntilda, Wilfregonda, and Bertilda, all who had reigned at the same time. It does not appear that Ragnitrude, Sigebert's mother, ever enjoyed the title of queen. The division of his dominions between his 2 sons, which he had made during that's funny. Okay, which one of them wasn't, which he had made during his life, was rigidly observed. I might have to sorry. All right. So yes, all of the wives enjoyed the title of queen, but the Segibet's mother did not. All right. Okay. So the division of his dominions between his two sons, which he had made during his life, was rigidly observed. Sigebert governed Austrasia, and Clovis was proclaimed king of Neustria and Burgundy. The monks, who were greatly indebted to his generosity, have passed the most brilliant eulogies on the life and conduct of Dagobert. But though the gratitude of those writers be deserving of commendation, it has still betrayed them in gross flattery and flagrant misrepresentation. The commencement of his reign was well calculated to endure the esteem of his subjects, where the felicity of his people forms the chief object of a monarch's study and attention. Their affection will invariably follow, but Dagobert only changed the source of oppression. He restrained, indeed, the tyranny of the nobles, but he soon established a tyranny of his own, distressing his subjects to support his debauchery, loading them with burdensome imposts in order to gratify the insatiate avidity of his mistresses. Though not deficient in personal bravery, yea, he's brave, yet he did not possess that active valour which had hitherto distinguished all the descendants of Clovis. The fairest objects of commendation in the character of Dagobert are his charity, munificence, generosity. These virtues he certainly possessed in an eminent degree, though they were not directly with that propriety of judgment which is requisite to give them their most beneficial effect. So it wasn't good judgment there, character of judgment. During this reign, a collection was made of the laws of the different people subject to the domination of France. Those of the French, who are comprised under the head of Salic law or Ripuarian law, the first regarded such of the French as inhabited the country between the Meuse and the Loire, and the last was made for those who lived between the Meuse and the Rhine. They differ but little. It may be seen by them both that subjects were then divided into two classes, free men and slaves. Of the former there were two forts, one noble and the other not. The nobles only founded their nobility on the antiquity of their family. Letters or patents of nobility were not yet known. The chief dignities were those of patrician, duke, count, and domestic or governor of the royal mansions. The French paid no tribute. That was only exacted from the native Gauls, who were seldom distinguished by any other appellation than that of Romans. Maybe there's the Gallic influence on the hair. These were treated with contempt, and fiercely ever entrusted with the posts of importance. So coming from the Romans. The French law had one distinguishing characteristic, which no law indeed should be without. That is left nothing to do with the discretion of the judge. Every possible crime had its peculiar punishment specifically annexed to it, and the reparation for every species of insult, indecency, or ill treatment was appreciated with precision, if not always with rigid justice. Heavy fines were inflicted on such as stripped a man when dead or asleep. Does it really say that? Yeah. And on those also who mounted a horse without the permission of the owner, or a horse which they found astray. Whoever dared to squeeze the hand of a free woman was sentenced to pay 15 sols of gold. Oh, none of that flirting. If he took her by the arm, he paid double that sum. And if he touched her bosom, quadruple. An old lech. These regulations were highly prudent in those times. For the French being accustomed to take their wives with them to camp, it was necessary to secure them against every kind of insult. The provisions of the Salic law, with regard to homicide, were not equally salutary or unobjectionable. It allowed of that same composition for murder, which in the ages of imperfect civilization was common to almost all countries, and fixed a price on the life of each individual. On this head it entered into 1,000 particulars. If the assassin was insolvent, his relations to a certain degree were compelled to pay for him, and if they were not rich enough, he became a slave to the family of the deceased. Such a system of jurisprudence was rather calculated to authorize crimes than to repress them. Something indeed might be said in its favor when applied to countries but thinly inhabited, since it preserved a member of the community and assured to the relations of the deceased either a slave or an advantageous composition, which proved some compensation for the loss of a kinsman, whose labours might have contributed to their subsistence. So in a way, they're not doing away with the murderers, they're keeping them on, because maybe they were running out of people at the time. And it was probably on this principle alone that such laws were founded. Every citizen, too, was compelled by it to keep a strict watch over the conduct of those who were allied to him by blood, since in certain cases he was responsible for their misbehavior. It was allowable, however, for a man to exempt himself from the confederation. From the consequences of relationship. So if you have someone bad in your family, you had to keep an eye on them. You would be responsible for them in some degree, possibly monetarily. by a judicial declaration. But the person who made such a declaration forfeited all rights of inheritance, and if he were killed, his fortune, or at least the fine exacted from his assassin, was paid to the exchequer. The French laws also contained some regulations with regard to marriage, that being founded on feudal principles were more favourable to family pride and perhaps to domestic harmony. Not domesticated, but yeah, we need that too, of course. Than to conjugal happiness or the increase of population. Children could not marry without the consent of their fathers and mothers. The intended husband was obliged to offer a certain sum to the parents of his mistress, which, according to Fredegarius and Malkuthus, was a sol and a denier. If the bride was a widow, 3 sols of gold and 1 denier, which paid to the judges, who divided them among such of the relations of her first husband as were not hers. The offer of this sum, here they are getting offered of it, was always made in a public court. Where a shield had been elevated, and were 3 causes, at least, had been tried. Without this formality, the marriage was declared null. All right, so they're raising a shield in the public court. By this species of purchase, the husband acquired so great a power over his wife that he dissipated her dower, or any estate that had fallen to her, by succession. So the husband got all. She had no right to call on him for restitution. The reason assigned for exacting a larger sum for a widow than for a maid is this. When a girl married, she was supposed not to change her condition in point of subserviency, as she did but pass from under the tuition of her parents to that of her husband. A widow, on the contrary, had recovered her liberty, and therefore a greater value was placed on the sacrifice of it. A girl who suffered herself to be carried off was condemned to slavery. A free man who married a slave became a slave himself. The laws of inheritance were fixed with equal precision. The children of the deceased were sole heirs to his fortune. In default of them, his father and mother inherited. If he had no parents, his brothers and sisters. After them, the father's sisters, and the mother's sisters, and lastly, the next heir on the father's side. Adoption was allowed. The child was adopted in the king's presence, who issued his letters for that purpose, and he enjoyed all the rights of legitimate offspring. There were 3 sorts of possessions, those of which a man could dispose of at his pleasure, and which he termed propers. The propers, the benefices, which were either holden of the prince or of the church, on paying certain fines, and salic lands holden on condition of military service. women could only inherit the first. The second reverted to the king on the death of the possessor, and the last were confirmed to the male heirs. It is worthy of remark that the French monarchs, on their first establishment in Gaul, left the native Gauls in possession of 2/3 of their lands, on paying a tribute. The remaining third was distributed among the victorious troops, who, from the soldier to the general, all held of the king. That was pretty wordy in there, but I believe there are some bylaws on inheritance. Specific inheritance laws. All right, I'll put an end to this one today. We're at 638 AD.